Ladies and gentlemen, today I'd like to walk you through our design client example. This is Relief Transmittance Protocol, which is also a layer 1, and I want to go through exactly what we've done for them on a high level basis, but if you want the details, you can find this document down below in the description. So when we do designs, we do three things. We do the utilities, the economy, and the tokenomics. So let's dive into them first. So firstly, you have the utilities. Now, the way that we figure out the utilities is, first of all, we figure out how many tokens you need, right? Do you need one token? Do you want to have a dual token economy, a triple token economy? There are loads of benefits and drawbacks. For example, with Relief, it took us a few calls, a few hours to figure out what would be best. And at the end of the day, use a dual token economy if you want to have different policies, for example, for the tokens. Same with a triple token economy. Like, for example, you can have one set of inflation rules for one of the tokens, whereas the other one is completely fixed, or you can have a mint and burn with one of the tokens. The other one is just a normal tradable token. One can be permissioned, one cannot. One can be a soft currency, as in it's not tradable in exchanges. The other one isn't. So the other one is, rather. So figuring that out, figuring what works for you, whether you should just have one token or a dual token system, or again, more tokens if you need. It depends on your product, it depends on your users. In the case of Relief, they wanted to have 3 tokens, we narrowed it down to 2. I know you have a third one here, but that's just a wrapped version of the root token. But we figured out that having 2 tokens would be better. One would be a kind of more of a soft currency that isn't on exchanges, whereas the other one would be on exchanges, which is the root token, as you can see here. Main thing of the utilities is you want to make sure that they align with the users, right? A lot of people, they go wrong and they create utilities for crypto purposes like staking or governance or whatever. And the problem is that, and I wrote an article on this, your token holders aren't necessarily your users. So your utilities, if they're not derived from the product, they just not going to be good, because they will create an inherent divergence between your users and your actual token holders. Like, for example, these utilities are all based specifically on the remittance protocol, on their proof of stake, patented proof of stake, consensus mechanism, and what the users will be doing within the ecosystem. But if you had, for example, random staking, right, the users wouldn't be buying the tokens. As a matter of fact, a lot of users in this ecosystem aren't even going to know that they're using tokens to begin with. So you would have these random people buying and staking the token to earn, let's say, rewards. Maybe the rewards which are coming at the cost of the users who are paying some sort of fee, which then gets redistributed to the stakers. That's a terrible token utility, because you're taxing users to reward random people, That's not good. So you need to have the utilities derived from the product. The way that we do this is relatively simple. So for example, what we do is, let's say you're a business and you have a user over here, and he sends money to the business, which then, pays someone else, and then this person, sends money to this guy. Whatever it is, right? This is the value flow, and I'll showcase what we've done for Relief in a second. But what you can do is you can say, okay, well, this is currently in dollars. Why don't we tokenize this? And now all of a sudden, this is done in the token. Now your token is a medium of exchange. Or maybe this user, pays you a $10 a month subscription. Maybe instead of that, what you do is you make them stake £10 worth or $10 worth of tokens. Now the token is like a stake to access premium features. Maybe that's the utility now. So that's the best way to do it. You visualize the actual business and then you tokenize it. And that's when we move on to the economy. So we do a rough draft to figure out the utilities, but we do the economy mostly simultaneously. And this is what we've done for Relief. So we visualized the users, we visualized the parts of the business, we visualized how the value flows. And then from there, we were able to confirm or derive and then confirm how exactly will the tokens operate, where will they operate, who pays the fees, how are the fees distributed, where are tokens minted, where are tokens burned. And this allows you to see, obviously, how value flows, but it also allows you to see where the token sinks are, where the token faucets are, and that's how you can establish your rates of inflation and a bunch of other kind of stuff, which we'll go into in a second. So this is where we visualize how it all works, and then we just explain how the different value flows happen. And then we move on to the policies. Now the policies and the economy are kind of the same section, but the policies specifically are where you add in the maths. So what that means is, for example, Relief, they have transaction fees. But what does that actually mean? How much will the transaction fee be? Is it just going to be 0.01%, or is there going to be some sort of mathematical backing behind the transaction fee? Well, there actually is, and this is the formula that we came up for them, and this is the logic behind it. Maybe there is also, for example, minting. So in their economy over here, you can see that we mint some tokens as a reward to the light nodes and also to the main validator nodes, which will, which are described later on. But right now we're looking at the leaf token. So some leaf tokens are being minted. They're being minted to the light nodes in essence. And the question is, how much should you mint? Well, once again, this is what we come up with. We come up with a formula to establish how much you should mint. The reason why we make formulas is because if we don't have the data right now, you're not on testnet. This project is quite early, so they're not on testnet. They don't have the users just yet. They have some, but not as many as they'd like. So it's pointless to tell them, oh, you should mint 10 tokens. That doesn't make sense. What is that based on? It's based on nothing. So what we do is we create the formulas where we figure out what the factors are that would go into the particular policy that you want to create. So in this case, minting. And minting, as we can see here, is a function of how many tokens you're burning, because that's just how the economy works. You firstly burn some tokens and then an equivalent amount you mint as per our design, because that's what works best. But then a function of burning is the transaction value multiplied by the fee that Relief takes, multiplied by the profit margins. And once you calculate all of that, you will establish how much you should mint in tokens, because it's a dynamic value. So for every transaction, you will burn and therefore mint at different values. But now Relief knows exactly how much they should mint. Relief now understands that, okay, well, once we have the users, we can just plug in this formula into the token contract or into whatever other smart contract, and it will create the numbers for, it will tell us how much you should mint and how much you should burn. In other case, for other formulas, to be fair, for this formula, you don't actually need to know how many users there are. This is just because it's a dynamic formula. But for other formulas, like for example here, the staking requirement. So for the staking requirement, actually, you do need to know how many users there are, because if you create a number, like for example, you need to stake 1,000 tokens. What happens if you only have, let's say, 100 users, right? And they're each staking 1,000 tokens, but then the value of the network is so large that the amount of tokens that they're staking in dollar value is just absolutely minuscule. So the cost of them corrupting the network and being malicious is very, very small, because if that little amount gets slashed, then who cares? But the profit that they can make because the network is so valuable is very, very high. So that doesn't make sense. So you need to adjust the staking requirement relatively dynamically, but also you can't, in line with the growth of the project, but you also can't have it change every single second, every single block. That doesn't make sense. It's you can't have a validator that constantly needs to update the amount of tokens that they're staking. So we've came up with something, again, relatively innovative. Well, not relatively. I've never seen this done before, but this is innovative as far as I'm concerned. And what we've done is, again, we built the formula, we've established what the factors are, we put those factors into a whole calculator that, again, I've built fully from scratch for these guys. And this calculator allows us to see how many tokens are being emitted based on how many validators there are and based on how many transactions are going through the network. And, I worked backwards to calculate a fair amount of tokens that need to be staked. For example, for Relief, instead of looking at the value, TVL, because in the Relief ecosystem, there isn't going to be much TVL. This is a remittance protocol. It's all about transactions. So here, the main value is transactional value. How much value does a particular validator confirm, whenever they confirm transactions per month, for example. That's what the formula is based on. So you calculate that, you add in some other factors, and then, again, I used some logic from the calculator over here to figure out, okay, well, if an average validator, if we want them to become profitable within 2 to 4 years, which is the general truth when it comes to layer ones, like Ethereum, for example, and I'm pretty sure Sui and Aptos, what you do then is, what I did then is I took the number, I looked at the calculator, and from there I derived how much they should be earning, from which I derived how much they should be staking. But it changes dynamically, because every time the transactional value per validator increases in certain intervals, so does the staking requirement, which means that, generally speaking, it would be a very rare occurrence for a validator to need to change the amount that they're staking in dollar value. However, it is still a thing, so that if the network grows stupendously fast and completely outpaces the amount of validators that are growing, so the growing number of validators, then each validator would be required to stake a lot more tokens because they're confirming a lot more transactions. Of course, there is natural behavioral economics here, because the more the network grows whilst the validator count doesn't, the more each validator earns, which of course increases their APY, which incentivizes other validators to come. So generally speaking, I don't expect there to be much movement. But this system allows them to start with nothing and grow to a kind of a plateaued amount of validators and transactions. And that's what all of this explains. That's where all of these formulas come from, and where the calculator comes from, and what it allowed us to do. So that's the policy section, and we do that for everything. Like, for example, these guys have reputation scores. Well, how do you calculate the reputation scores of a validator? Well, first of all, there are different factors that go into it. Second of all, how much should they affect? How much should the factors be affected? Like, for example, the staked amount, it will multiply your reputation score by a factor of 1, 2, or 5. Whereas something like liveness will actually multiply a reputation score by a factor of 1 down to 0. So if you're not live whenever there is a check on whether you're online or not as a validator, if you're not online, your score will go down. You need to figure out by how much will it go down and why. You need to figure out how much things will increase and why. There was an interesting thing here for delegated amount, for example. As you can see, delegated amount here is between 0.8 to n. The reason why it's 0.8 is very long to explain, but that was a very fun mental exercise that I was doing with a head of research. But in essence, it's explained over here. So I'll let you read it, the document if you want. But there's a reason why I went with 0.8. And once again, this is what the policies need. You can't just design tokenomics and just think, oh, we're just going to reward 1,000 tokens, and how much are we minting? Are we going to mint 10 tokens per action, and how much are we going to burn? We're going to burn half of the fees. You can, sure, but realistically, you're not going to be $1 billion project if you're not meticulous with every number, if you're not careful with why you've chosen the numbers that you've chosen. Everything here, every formula, every number we have stress tested. We made sure that it makes sense. We make sure that it works when they're young, when they're old. You have to do that. If you don't do that, again, like, your economy might be fine, for the first couple months when a minuscule amount of your tokens are out in the market. But as soon as you start unlocking more tokens, little tiny problems will become very, very obvious. When you start growing to a particular amount of users, and then the amount of malicious users also grows, they will also break the economy in every single way that they can. And this is something that our audits point out quite a lot, because when I stress test economies for our audits, that's exactly what I find. I find that, but if a user does this, then they can game the system, completely milk all of your rewards, for example, or whatever, and just leave and nuke your token. And, it's because people don't really think, generally speaking, on a deep enough level about the economics, about the incentives, about the alignment of the users and the protocol on a deep enough level. And that's fine. You're not meant to, If I'm buying a house, I'm not meant to be thinking about the plumbing and the electrics. I hire someone to do that. It's the same thing here. If you're a founder, focus on the development. If you're a technical founder. If you're a business founder, focus on the go-to-market, focus on the distribution, focus on the marketing. Don't try and spend, hours doing tokenomics. And I know I may sound biased here, but you're going to spend many, many hours, many, many days trying to design tokenomics. And I guarantee you, if you just give me 1 hour, I will find everything that's wrong with it. And I will show why your token will just collapse. Because that's just what happens. And it's fine. That's what's meant to happen. You're not meant to be good at economics and financials on this level where there's so many complexities and so many moving parts. But that's what we do. That's what we help with. Finally, we move on to the tokenomics, which is, the infamous table. Now, arguably, this whole thing is tokenomics, but because most people refer to tokenomics as just this table, because they don't understand what token economics is, we refer to this part as tokenomics specifically, but it's the supply side. So when it comes to the tokenomics, we figure out the valuations, we figure out the vesting schedules. Again, all of this is based on the users. It's based on when they're launching, how they're launching, they're going to centralized exchanges or launch pads, or they're doing a fair launch, or they're doing a Dutch auction on Fueled Foundry. All of those things matter. They all impact your valuation. They all impact your vesting schedules, your allocations, the strategy for your launch. Are you going to do an airdrop? Are you going to do a marketing campaign? How much should you allocate to those things? All of those things matter, and all of those things need reasonable numbers behind them. And the thing is, if you change one number, you have to change the others. Let's say you decide last minute that you want to increase your airdrop tranche from 5% to 10%. Where is that 5% coming from? It can't come from the VCs, because then you're raising less money, unless you increase the valuations. But if you increase the valuations, then you have more sell pressure to account for. Now you can increase the vesting schedules, but then of course the VCs might not be as incentivized to invest into you. Okay, so maybe you take some tokens from the liquidity tranche. Well, that can't run either, because then your token will be very volatile. Everything matters. Every single thing matters. It doesn't matter if you're a $5 million, $10 million protocol. You're a very humble, small project. You'll be fine. With $5 million valuation, you'll be fine. But nobody is. Everyone wants to launch at 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 mil valuations. You need to have everything thought out. And that's what we do, again, when it comes to tokenomics especially. So, we align the emissions with the growth of the project, with the growth of the users and whatever the project assumes. So here you can see kind of an S-curve. And again, that is aligned specifically because I was informed, when designing tokenomics and, in line with when the token will launch, what happens is after a couple months, they plan to, once they launch the token, once they start the validator machine, after a few months, they plan to really scale. And then, after about a year after that, they plan to plateau a little bit in terms of validator growth. So that's how the calculator was designed. That's how the emissions are designed. And that's where you can see this kind of like a very smooth S-curve. Now, we showcase a lot more, like the tokens per month in circulation, the sell pressure per month, the investor ROIs as well. So for example, if you do a 2x from launch, you can see that the seed investors will become profitable by the 9th month. And, you can see down here the market cap. This tokenomics, and there's a lot more now to it, is on our template, our free template for tokenomics. Feel free to use it. We made it free because everyone deserves to have good tokenomics templates, and the ones that are out there right now are pretty terrible. But again, be careful with the numbers. If you want to do this yourself, go ahead. You can always safeguard yourself by having a very low valuation. But if you want to have a high valuation, trust me when I say just use a professional. Even if you don't use us, use someone else, because every single economy that I have audited has been terrible, except for one, Exodex. They are a perfect economy, but they're also not raising with the token, so they don't have these problems. Well, it's not that they don't have these problems, but they don't have a lot of the problems that typically occur when it comes to the tokenomics specifically. But their economy, perfect. The only one I've audited, 15, maybe 15, 20 projects, no, close to 15. Terrible, all terrible. And when I say terrible, I mean on a score of 0 to 9, an average of 1 to 2 for the whole thing, for the utilities, the economy, and the tokenomics. Valuation was way too high. Emissions were way too quick. So much user misalignment, incentive misalignment. So for example, they incentivize the wrong type of user, or they incentivize, again, token holders at the cost of users, whatever it is. Just general problems with the maths, maybe even errors. I had a project that I audited that, assumed they were going to be making $7 million in fees, but actually they missed a zero. And in fact, they're going to be making $700,000 in fees, which impacted, their emissions, impacted the valuation, and impacted how much they can advertise that they're going to give away in their airdrop and everything else. So, be careful. This is what we do for designs. Hopefully this was useful. Once again, this document will be down below in the description. And yeah, thank you very much for watching, and have a good day.